Hello, everybody. Welcome to our PHIUS webinar series. Today's webinar is PHIUS Plus 2018, the Affordable Path to Net Zero, presented by our Executive Director, Katrin Klingenberg. I don't know why I just said her name like that. Katrin, she's on the line here. In a moment, I will hand it over to Katrin, but there are a few things to note for our webinar. This webinar is 1 hour. It's being recorded, and all registrants will have access to the recording afterwards via a follow-up email, so watch your inbox. This webinar also qualifies for one CPHC CEU, and CPHC CEUs are self-reported. You'll see the link and verification code at the end of Katrin's presentation. You will also receive a follow-up email with a certificate and reporting information for your records. In addition, this webinar also qualifies for one AIA LU, and that will be reported internally through PHIUS within the next few days, as long as you provided an AIA number during registration. So take a look at the control panel on the side of your screen. If you have questions, feel free to type a question into the box on the right. We will try to get to questions about 10 till the end of the hour. And so feel free to type in questions throughout the webinar, but we will not get to the questions until the end. And also keep an eye out for the chat box. There could be information and links that I'll be sending out to the audience, so keep an eye on that. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Katrin Klingenberg, our Executive Director of PHIUS. I'm going to turn it over to her right now.
Thank you, Anissa. Thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar on PHIUS Plus 2018. And the subtitle here, the Affordable Path to Zero, which we believe is a really important topic as zero, and getting to reaching our carbon reduction goals is becoming more and more in focus. Just very quickly, a brief introduction for those who have joined who are not familiar with me or PHIUS. I am the Executive Director, as Anissa mentioned, and also co-founder. We've been doing this work since 2009. We're a nonprofit organization, the leading standard setting, certification, training, and research organization in regards to science in North America. And before I jump into the presentation right here, I just want to quickly mention and give a shout out to the project that is on the cover slide right here. Very exciting developments are happening all over the country. PHIUS Plus 2018 and before that 2015 is being taken up all over the country, in Canada as well. And this particular project here is groundbreaking because it is the first multifamily project realized within the city limits of Chicago. And as we've seen around the country, the first projects that people can actually experience and walk into, they are crucial for making other projects happen, as well as peers can see. This is a project designed by Landon Boone and Baker, and Lucha is the housing development organization here in Chicago. Okay. Here we go. As Anissa also mentioned, this webinar qualifies for one learning unit for CPHC, and we'll show you the self-reporting code at the end of this presentation. All right, so during this hour, I'd like to take you through the PHIUS Plus 2018 certification update. I'd like to start with framing the topic by giving you a little bit of context, the general certification trends that we've seen around the country, and also a quick review of the methodology and how it assists on the path to zero. Then I'll talk about the actual process of the update, how we went about it. And also in that segment, I will talk about how the changes will actually affect different building typologies as you're designing to meeting these standards. And then I will close with a more detailed look at like why the level of efficiency that we're proposing under the standard is so crucial and core to reaching zero, not only on a building basis, but also on the overall grid basis. So as most of you are probably familiar with and aware of, we started out with the PHIUS+ Passive Building Standard series in 2015. That particular standard was developed under a Department of Energy grant, and it is the first and only climate-specific passive building standard that has also been cost optimized for the particular locale and cost structure of where the building is constructed. That standard was very successfully rolled out in 2015, and you can see here on the left-hand side that was the previous cover of the first certification guidebook, which, by the way, is a phenomenal kind of piece of writing contributed by our certification staff, helping you through the certification process. You can see on this first cover page here on the left, when we first started out certifying passive projects, most of the projects were indeed still single-family projects. You can see there are already a few and a far in between that start to look bigger. First multi-family projects were also certified under that standard. And then in 2018, now since April, that new standard is in effect, and PHIUS+ 2015 has been phased out after 1 year of basically phasing PHIUS+ 2018 in. You can see on this cover page that a lot of the projects actually that we then started seeing certifying at the end of 2015 had already added photovoltaics, combined heat and power solutions to their projects to further bring their overall source energy down on a path to zero. So a lot of projects really have already been using PHIUS+ as a baseline for their efforts to get as close to zero as they possibly could within their budget. So that was a really interesting relation that results of certification under 2015, and then concluded from that it is time for our methodology to take a slightly different approach to meeting the source energy. And that is one of the major changes that I'd like to talk about today in this update. So just quickly giving context and trends, PHIUS+ and PHI certified projects. This is roughly the certification pie that we're seeing in North America right now. So fully certified projects only, not pre-certified or anything else. We keep a log of pre-certified projects, but PHI doesn't. So to normalize our data, we are only counting certified square footage here in this particular pie. You can see that the PHI has currently a share of like 28.5%, and PHIUS+ has 70.8% with the climate-specific passive building standard, other than PHI standard, which uses one certification criterion in all climates everywhere. So now this is all just PHIUS+ data, only PHIUS+ projects. As I mentioned, we keep a very close look on the data that comes in from certified projects. Here on the left-hand side, you can see that we're, of course, logging all the square footage that is being that is in the pipeline. And in that graph, we can see now that we're very clearly on an exponential growth curve. We're doubling compared to last year, and we're well on our way regarding the projections here. And the projections for 2019 are indeed to reach 10,000 submitted square feet by the end of the year. On the other hand, PHIUS+ certified and pre-certified square, that essentially are the projects that are fully done. And those that have gone through the pre-certification design review and have been approved for going into the construction phase. Often those pre-certified projects then stay in that construction phase for quite a while until they get finally certified. So this is a good kind of like view of the projects that are either completed or are in the process of being constructed. And you can see right here that those are now total to roughly 5,000 square feet as well. So this 1-to-2 ratio that I mentioned earlier. Why certifying? Well, for one, it shares knowledge. Secondly, we have excellent certification staff that has a very kind of like big picture view, because we've now over the years since 2009 probably reviewed about 1,000 projects all over the country in all different climate zones. And it is easy for folks to make a mistake, even like experienced CPHCs that are understanding the subject matter very well. I'm just being told that I have audio issues, and some of you might have raised that. Should I call in? Yes. Hold on a second. Give me a minute. I will call into the platform.
While Katrin is switching her audio input, there are some links that I have shared on the chat. So please take a look. She mentioned PHIUS+2015 and project certifications. I've provided links to both of those pages if you're interested in checking them out. And there will be more links posted throughout the webinar. I already see we have some questions coming in. Many of them were about the audio, so thank you for letting us know about it. We're working on getting her connected. So we're going to have a moment of silence here as Katrin reconnects in a moment, and sit tight. We'll be back in just a moment. Thank you all.
Hello. Inessa, can you do a quick sound check? Can you hear me?
Hi, Kat. We can hear you.
Is this better?
So far, this is better.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
All right. Are we ready to continue
All right.
then?
Yep. Back on the road.
Okay.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks. So I left off where I was talking about the reason of why to certify and why it is beneficial to the project and the project team, the project quality. I mentioned that since 2009, our certification staff has reviewed 1,000+ projects all over the country, all different building typologies and sizes. And that is a very lucky position to be in, because we see a lot of really great solutions for varying situations, and the team can really help to hone in and to catch potential red flags that come up during the certification process. And that helps, of course, to minimize potential risk for the building envelope, and it helps to make the building perform at the end. And as what we're doing right here, we're sharing our data about certified projects, and that shows that progress is being made. We can talk to policymakers, and we can actually have something to show for. Look, this is not just something we're talking about, but it is actually happening around the country. And I am advancing here. Okay, good. So this slide also shows standards are great, but if we can't prove that they actually predict accurately the performance, then something's missing. So we keep a very close eye on the measured data for our projects over the years, and you can see the slide right here. Cross-section throughout all PHIUS+ certification project numbers. our average performance that is coming in for PHIUS+ projects is within 7% modeled versus measured. And we are very happy with that result. Of course, this is not good enough yet. We're trying to get within 5%. And we keep continually improving our modeling tool, in this particular case here, the WUFI Passive modeling software. I'm not sure why I am having trouble advancing. Okay, here we go. PHIUS+ certification. So at this point, where our source energy targets are set, and I'm going to show you here in a second the architecture of how the standard works again quickly as an overview. But just to put us in kind of context in relationship to other organizations that are pushing for similar goals. Here, the Architecture 2030 Challenge that you might all be familiar with. We are currently on target to meeting their 70% carbon reduction goals here within their system. But really where the secret sauce of passive building and the PHIUS+ 2018 design methodology comes in, that is a different focus than just looking at source energy reduction and carbon energy reduction. We are also first and foremost looking at optimizing the envelope for the best possible result in terms of like conservation before we hop off to getting into other renewable solutions and active generation. And this kind of like architecture that we're talking about here, pass-fail standard, is still the same kind of architecture under PHIUS+ 2018, but really the secret sauce is here that we're setting cost optimized, climate optimized, and that means optimized for comfort and resiliency, space conditioning targets that first help the designer to dial in the envelope for the building and the loads and the systems. And only once that is done and those conditioning, space conditioning targets have been met, then a total source energy criterion is applied, and that has to be designed too. So under programs that are just requiring source energy reductions, EUI reductions in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, those programs are missing, in our opinion, this critical step of optimization to take advantage of conservation in the built environment. And then you can see right here, the third criterion to meet the PHIUS+ criteria, the air tightness, I've grayed out a little bit because really in principle it's a slightly different criterion. It's more like a qualitative criterion other than the other two, which are quantitative. But of course it is a hard line in the sand, so in that sense it needs to be listed as a pass-fail performance criterion here. And then PHIUS also has an additional certification, PHIUS+ Source 0. For that one, the project is required to actually zero out source energy on site. So the methodology here that we're using to dial in the climate-specific space conditioning targets and to also cost optimize them is that for 2015, we developed a methodology to use the BOP tool from NREL, from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, to help us optimize for the sweet spot between conservation and generation. You can see this curve right here on the left-hand side where you see the number 1. That is basically the code baseline. The green line represents energy use reductions. And then the more you invest in the envelope, and then once you get past the point of diminishing returns, you push back up into the diminishing curve for the upgrades, and they do not pay back. So we used that tool to identify this number 2 sweet spot on the path to zero before it becomes more cost effective to switch over to renewable energy, let it be off-site renewable energy or on-site renewable energy, to generate that particular sweet spot for all different climate zones, locales, and considering the North American cost structure. Okay, So maybe one quick word before I go more into detail here. Quickly go back for a second. What is important here to say is that more is actually less in this particular optimization process that one employs to get to that sweet spot. So at some point, more is going to cost you more, will not pay back. And on top of it, if you use the wrong targets to optimize for the sweet spot, you might push back into diminishing returns, put on too much insulation, which then in turn also contains higher carbon emissions because there's embodied energy in it. So it's really crucial to meet our overall carbon reduction goals for both, for buildings under operation as well as embodied carbon, to be very precise in identifying these exact sweet spots. And we have computing technology now, like the B-Opt optimizer that NREL has developed, that can actually calculate these optimal design points. So space conditioning, why is this the critical secret sauce here for PHIUS+2018 before we kind of like aim to get to zero? Again, for PHIUS+, we have 4 different criteria that have to be met under the space conditioning pass-fail segment. We have the heating demand, the cooling demand, and they all differ by climate. We have the peak heating load and peak cooling load. All those 4 criteria have to be met. And the reason for why they have to be met is, for one, the annual demands for heating and cooling. They actually translate into the kilowatt hours saved on an annual basis, so they pay back the initial investment. And the low peak loads, they ensure comfort. They also ensure resiliency, passive survivability, and they also reduce the mechanical system sizes with it, follow-up maintenance, so on and so forth. So in 2015, the reduction versus code, we in the study that we published with NREL, the climate-specific passive building standards, we showed that the targets could easily be reduced for heating demand and cooling demand compared to the code baseline. For heating by almost 90%, for cooling almost 50%. And cooling is much harder to do with passive measures. But the good news was here that the peak load capacity was much closer to each other, like 77 peak for heating and 69 for cooling. So that results in an overall total energy reduction of 80%, and with that, the related carbon emissions. And we were absolutely on track with what we were doing here. You can see right here the Building America Research Agenda for the time period of 2020 to 2030. They are very much looking at what we have already established in the PHIUS+2018, crushing the thermal load even further compared to their work from 2010 to 2020. And that qualified us to then enter into a partnership with the Zero Energy Ready Home program. We are the only climate-specific passive building standard that exists, and they honor that by making us a partner of the Zero Energy Ready Home program. We also require Zero Energy Ready Home requirements as a prerequisite to our certification, which is a really solid building science foundation, a bit more on the prescriptive side of things, but again, more requirements to ensure that risk is mitigated and that the quality and the durability of the building is assured through the certification process. And again, here, Sam Rashkin from the Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Home program, he created this kind of staircase that follows along the Department of Energy research agenda. So that takes me to the process and the actual PHIUS+2018 updates. The passive design principles, nothing new. Most of you are familiar with those. I think we all have gotten really good at employing them and understand them very well. Just quickly going through here again. Continuously insulated envelope, no thermal bridges, airtightness in buildings is a big excellent measure to bring the energy efficiency down. to increase energy efficiency. We have heat recovery ventilation, controlling shading, dialing it in by climate, shading and heat gain as well. And then we also have the hydrothermal side of things on the bottom half of this circle that we need to concern ourselves with. The humidity, how the humidity affects the energy balance, how the humidity affects the envelope. Do we have condensation risk in the envelope? How does the HVAC system kind of interact with the envelope? And then also we have the hydrothermal storage. And that lower half of that circle, those are all elements that really need to be calculated in a dynamic tool to accurately represent the effects of moisture and thermal storage and interaction with the HVAC system on the building. So once we dial all that in, then we get a building that is very comfortable and healthy. Quality is high, the durability is high, very energy efficient and resilient. So to do that, we have now quite powerful dynamic tools that can perform this analysis for us and that can help us in the whole building energy simulation, taking all these factors into account here, of course, climate data, air exchange, inner load, set points, all the specifications for the envelope. The WUFI passive tool can now analyze and help you to dial in the components for the building envelope exactly for your specific climate location, and you are being guided by the specific energy targets. Again, the energy targets are really crucial to get a well-optimized building for that particular location, and also built into the actual targets is the cost optimization for that particular location. So you get the best optimal result and at the best cost for your building. Now, when we decided to recalculate those targets that we had established in 2015, we were able to use a few learnings from the years 2015 to earlier than 2015, really, to up to the rework of the 2018 standards. For one, as I mentioned earlier, initially we had seen only single-family projects, but we soon saw a lot of very large multifamily projects come into the office for certification. And very quickly, it was clear that large buildings are much easier to make meeting the targets that we had set. So the initial 2015 targets were set based on a standard single-family home, 2,500 square feet, and the theory there was that that is really worst-case scenario, and anything bigger will have no trouble meeting these standards. But because we have this computing power at our fingertips now, the Building Energy Optimizer and WUFI Passive, we were actually able to then, under 2018, set our goal a little bit higher and say, look, we don't have to be that kind of non-granular, just basically establishing for worst case scenario and then say everybody else is going to have an easy time to meet. We can actually optimize not only by climate for the North American cost structure, but we can also optimize for building typology. And it's not only that we can, we should. So that's essentially what PHIUS+2018 is about, as well as a shift in thinking about the source energy targets. So just quickly here, a summary of this idea, big buildings, you can see this here on the right-hand side, much less R value required in the walls to meet the targets under 2015. And then the little guy, the little building, single story, lifted off of the ground floor here. This is a Staten Island project. Has a really hard time to a point where the builder is not going to do it again because it was cost prohibitive. And this was a grant funded project by NYSERDA actually The builder had initially committed to 5 projects, but I think only 3 were built, and it was clear that the R values were not cost effective, so it was abandoned. So there was a clear need to create targets that are more specific to the individual building typology. We followed the same calculations, lots of analysis. This is a screenshot here from the BOPT optimizing tool. Same principle as the general kind of like graph that I showed you earlier. On the left, you see the essentially kind of like code baseline, and then the black line as improvements into the envelope are employed, brings down the source energy, and at some point the improvements do no longer result in dramatic improvements regarding source energy, and it soon then after that pushes back into diminishing returns. So that means that the last percent to achieve higher source energy savings would be really expensive, and our goal was to find that optimal sweet spot between conservation and generation. All right, so these are the 5 building typologies that we calculated for all different climate zones, and we also used different occupant densities. So very quickly became clear as buildings became bigger and bigger that occupant density and internal loads have a significant effect on what the optimal design for the envelope would be, and we had to figure that into the standard setting process. So we did. And again, side note here, the architecture of these buildings, these are really just kind of typologies to distribute the amount of glazing that we anticipated, and it's not claiming to be pretty. It's just study buildings. All right, so while we were at it, we also optimized for basically all global climate zones, and in that effort, we also aligned with the ASHRAE climate zones, as you can see right here. So the new standards are based on these global climate zones. And just to give you an example now, how those different targets. So basically now we are taking building size into account and occupant density. And you can see right here, we have entered a small building for the climate zone 5B. This is our calculator for calculating these new targets. All the analysis has been baked into this calculator. If you enter the floor area 2,500 square feet, and you enter the occupancy, the calculator actually estimates your space conditioning criteria right here. And for this particular project in 5B, you can see that this little building still obviously is heating dominated, and but cooling is also present, and the peak loads are again dominated by the heating load. So if we switch to a really big building with lots of occupancy, actually the heating demand and cooling demand switches. So the building now is dominated in the same climate zone by the cooling demand and no longer by the heating demand, because there are so many internal loads in the building. So heating really is no longer a problem, but cooling becomes the problem because of those internal loads. And similarly, for the peaks are actually closer together now. So for 2018, what changes? All the different heating demand, cooling demand, and peaks, they have been updated by building typology and occupant density for each climate. Lots of calculations went into that one. The air tightness was updated 0.06 CFM per square foot envelope. That was really just a rounding error. This is a fixing of an earlier inaccuracy. And then the source energy limit, you might notice right here, got tightened to 3,840 kilowatt hours per person and per year, and source energy for non-residential to 34.8 kBTUs per square foot and year. So that is, in all likelihood, all the other targets, while they changed, we feel they are much better suited now to really dial in the optimal solution, cost, comfort, resiliency-wise, for each location. The biggest change is the tightening of the source energy limit, and with that also the thinking of the tech committee in terms of how to get from here to zero. So we've always said we were planning to tighten the source energy limit along lines, but we never really aligned ourselves in our philosophy with, for example, 2030, which has very clearly laid out a pathway to zero, like certain increase in savings every year. So for 2018, the technical committee has decided to align with that philosophy and has decided that we have to get to zero. Now, this is a difficult thing to do, obviously, and some of you might be looking at this number, 3,840 kilowatt hours per person a year. And those of you who are working on multifamily projects, you might get a funny feeling that dense buildings will have a very hard time meeting this new source energy limit. So there are a couple points of relief here. Let me see. I'm going to go through this real quick because that explains that point. So in WUFI Passive, we now have those updates integrated. The new version 3.2 has come out. And so now you can actually either externally with this calculator that I just showed you, calculate your targets, or you can just put them into, you can generate them by inputting the climate data and the utility cost for your project within the software. So here's the explanation for the point that I was trying to make on the previous slide. The new source energy factor, it's actually less stringent than you might think when you first see the tightening from 6,200 to 3,840 per person, kilowatt hours per person. Initially, or previously, we were using a source energy conversion factor of 3.16. We use a national grid factor to determine source energy because we believe that we're all in the same boat. And so it's essentially kind of like a non-monetary subsidy from one region that maybe is a little bit cleaner to the other region that is not as clean to meet our overall national goal in terms of carbon reduction. So now in the new WUFI version, we have updated the conversion factor to 2.8 because the US grid has become cleaner. So essentially the tightening of the source energy criterion is not as drastic as one would think, for one. And then for Canada, we also updated it to 1.96. So that makes up for much of the tightening, but the concern still remains that if you have a multifamily project that is densely populated, that it will be difficult to meet the resulting source energy criterion. If you have a fairness principle, if you use a fairness principle as we do, every person gets a certain budget, like 3,840 per person. So a few of you guys have voiced concern, and the board has heard you. And we're actually working right now with the tech committee to come up with an alternative compliance path to our fairness principle that we're currently using to calculate the source energy criterion. I'll talk about that in the next slide. So let's finish up really quick here, the WUFI Passive updates and highlights. The new source energy targets for residential and non-residential, they're now updated. You saw the numbers earlier. And now here's the good news. So it's not only that we have tightened it, but we also have now basically put systems like solar thermal or very efficient ventilation systems or very efficient heat pumps on the same footing as photovoltaic, because photovoltaic has become so cost effective that you can now actually also use all of your photovoltaic production. You also have new tools available to meet your source energy criterion, which is, for example, buying solar renewable energy credits. We do require to discount them significantly, and we do require a long-term contract. But the designers now have many more different options that what we've seen, at least over the last kind of 6 months, has resulted in very positive feedback, because it helps there are more options available to meet the source energy criterion, and also to cost optimize what is required to meet it. In WUFI Passive, also more updates here that help you to optimize your design. We have more accurate domestic hot water calculation methods included now, great calculators. And we also have a new shading algorithm, which we're really excited about, because the previous algorithm was really rough, not very granular. So this new shading algorithm actually uses the calculations from the dynamic side of WUFI+, and we are very hopeful that the now modeled predictions are getting even closer to what we will be able to measure when the building is taken in operation, is starting to operate. We're excited about this new shading algorithm. We feel that will help to get us closer in terms of modeled versus measured. So now, very quickly, a little bit of a kind of a word regarding the fairness principle that I mentioned earlier, in terms of like determining the source energy criterion and the potential alternative path that the tech committee and the board are going to offer to folks certifying. So PHIUS has established a fairness principle based on a fair share of source energy contribution per person, based on the total carbon reduction that we can afford to emit by 2030. And other organizations have different definitions, different motivations. Architecture 2030, their goal clearly here is to get to zero in terms of carbon, other than the DOE motive to get to zero. DOE motive has their motive is more like energy savings, more resilient grids, and the Architecture 2030 motive is carbon reduction. So while we have a fairness principle based on a per person basis, Architecture 2030 is looking at creating this target that should be met differently. And they still have the same goal as we do, like X reduction in a certain amount of years to get to zero to stabilize the climate. Now, the way that 2030 is actually calculating source energy is based on a percent savings basis. So they have a different calculator, essentially. And that different calculator results in slightly different targets. They're all still very close, because we're all trying to get to zero. But really, the final word has not been spoken on, like, what really the source energy bucket should be that we have to meet at what point in time on our path to zero. So essentially, what the board has decided is that the tech committee should take a look at including a zero code compliance path, basically using the zero code calculator from the Architecture 2030 organization to determine the source energy factor. Turns out that that source energy factor is much closer to the old targets in the PHIUS+2018, which will help larger buildings with higher density, if they choose to kind of choose this certification route as an alternative. Of course, the tech committee feels very strongly about PHIUS+2018 and the per person principle, fairness principle to determine source energy. We would prefer to for teams to choose the 2018 path, but the tech committee is considering an alternative path through the zero code from 2030. Quick side note here, their kind of recommendation on how to design an energy efficient building. First step, obviously, the shell, and then add renewables based on ASHRAE 90.1 2016 or 189.1. We again would like to suggest that the passive building design methodology that follows the architecture of designing to space conditioning targets that have been cost optimized and climate optimized first, that is a critical piece that is missing in the current zero energy discussion. So last year we proposed an ASHRAE passive building design standard, and it was adopted by the standards committee in January at the Atlanta meeting. And currently ASHRAE is working on putting this committee together. So we're very excited that hopefully this work will result in a passive building high performance pathway that will be making it easier for code officials to adopt that design strategy. Okay, and that takes me to the last portion of this presentation. Trying to drive home why designing to passive building standards, cost optimized and climate optimized, PHIUS+ 2018 is so crucial, not only for the building itself and for energy savings reasons and comfort and health, but also for the redesign of the overall system of the delivery of energy, the redesign of our grid. So very quickly, we have a system currently that delivers energy to our buildings, to our end users. What we're seeing is that our base load is fairly low, but then we have these peaks during peak times, and essentially plants have to be on standby to be able to meet those peak loads, which occur only at very rare occasions. And those plants are really, really expensive. They are big. They have to be able to produce a lot of capacity to meet those peak loads. And hence we have somewhat kind of like great redundancy in the system. So when we look at the various segments of the grid, and we're starting to look at how to get these different segments of electricity delivery to zero, showing you this overall right here. I'd like to zoom in on the Texas example right here. So Texas is one of those three segments that delivers that operates the electric grid and also manages the deregulated market. So this is a slide right here created by Amber Levins from the Rocky Mountain Institute that essentially shows, like, if that Electric Reliability Council of Texas, if they have the goal to be all renewable 100% by 2050, what they first need to do is basically bring their base load down. There's a mismatch. Even if they had all solar production, the load is too high. So essentially, energy efficiency measures have to be applied to bring that base load down, so we create a better match between solar production and usage. Now, that is still a problem because on a daily profile, a lot of you might have heard of the duck curve. If we have inefficient buildings with lots of PV production, they produce a lot during the day when the peak is not there. When, like in the evening, when the sun goes down, then the need for energy goes up, but there's no more solar. So we create this kind of like overproduction during times when we don't need as much energy and we don't have as much when we need it. So that's a problem for the grid. And you might have heard of the concept the duct curve that can now be basically flattened by using 10 strategies, which I go into here in a second. Essentially, we're trying to teach the duck to fly, and this is these next couple slides are from a paper and presentation that Lisa presented at the last conference, which is really, really critical to the point that we're making here. So essentially, we're now applying these 10 strategies, and a lot of them are passive strategies and conservation strategies, which essentially push down the peak in the evening, and they bring up the bottom of the duck from overproduction. So here, these grid integration strategies, and as we think about 100% renewable grid and how our passive buildings fit into that grid, it all makes perfect sense. So the strategies here of reducing the overall electrical load and flatten the daily curve, reducing the mismatch between on-site PV generation, because now the very efficient building only needs a very small PV system. And then in addition to that, we can deploy other demand responsive systems that control further what and how much energy is being used in homes. So the demand response systems are much better employed to passive buildings than inefficient buildings. And then beyond that, we can have additional kind of like technological controls, like potentially controlling electric water heaters, artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. So very quickly, Lisa ran a case study, basically a multifamily DOE prototype project through DOE, one that was just code baseline essentially, and then she ran it through, at the time still in PHIUS+ 2015, through the WUFI passive software. And here is the load profile from those two buildings in comparison. So you can see right here that the baseline in the code building, the loads are obviously much higher, but also the mismatch, because to get an inefficient building to zero, you need a large PV system. You're causing a whole bunch of spikes as you're trying to zero out your energy consumption and sending stuff back into the grid, causing problems for the grid and creating the duck curve. Now the passive building flattens the peaks, and it also flattens the production that goes back into the grid and could cause this belly of the duck. Another kind of graphic representation here saying essentially the same thing. The tighter the core in this graphic right here of the base load and of the hourly PV production, the less spiky thing we see there, the closer we get to kind of like a core element of the newly redesigned 100% renewable grid. And again, here, the point that I already made, the baseline building does have this kind of like duck curve belly on the bottom and the head sticking up on top. The passive building now flattens out the belly and brings down the load in the evening of the day profile. And Lisa calls that the ripple effect, and that is a really good way to express what happens. It's not only that the building itself is more efficient, but every kilowatt hour that is saved on site will ripple throughout the entire delivery system of the grid. You can see it right here. The baseline building needs a lot more PV than if the same building townhouse row here was built to passive standards. And as a result, it's not only the PV system is smaller, but also the battery storage is smaller, and also the grid that is needed to distribute and to redistribute is much smaller. So essentially, when we envision a 100% renewable grid redesign that is kind of like based on decentralized microgrids. So we're basically, we have a controllable load of our buildings, we have controllable production of our buildings, and the less goes into the microgrid managing system and redistribution of those energies, the less infrastructure is needed, less cost is needed, less battery storage is needed to smooth out the peaks. So great stuff. This really makes the case why PHIUS+ 2018 cost optimized and climate optimized envelopes and building systems are at the core on the path to a renewable energy economy. And then there are great projects that I want to end with here real quick. The Realize project, some of you have heard about, industrialized exterior retrofits to zero energy, following the Energy Sprung model. We're working with Rocky Mountain Institute on that one. And this is a perfect example right here. They are bringing the load down first. They're upgrading the envelopes to basically passive levels. And then they also employ artificial intelligence, on-site storage and water heaters. It is really really quite amazing what folks are doing over there in the Netherlands. They're already quite a bit further along. And that also includes how they look at basically then looking at the energy saved in a zero energy project, potentially how to access the energy saved and the value of that by essentially creating a new kind of almost like an electric co-op on a per building basis. So essentially a microgrid subsegment for a townhouse. So as we looked at our certified projects from the last couple of years, Beach Green Dunes in Queens here, the first microgrid multifamily project, Solux Alpha in San Francisco, the Onion Flats, the Battery in Philadelphia, and the Rocky Mountain Institute in Basalt. All of those projects, we realized they are already going much further than our standards really necessarily had required them. They are trying to get as far and as close to zero as they possibly can. But they all of them used the PHIUS+ standards as their baseline. And the good news is that they already went further, and it was within their budget. So it appears that these standards are really successful at optimizing the envelope for cost, so that then there's additional budget then left over still to maybe make a little bit of a stronger push down to zero. So for example, the Beach Green Dunes project, that one is producing 30% of its own energy on site from combined heat and power and a sizable PV system on the roof. And that's an 8-story building. So it is really a fantastic project. Rocky Mountain Institute headquarters, totally, they are overproducing by far. They have a whole bunch of like electric vehicles in the parking lot for the staff. Absolutely fantastic performance of that project. And then here's the first completed Seattle multifamily project. That one, I'm not sure if it has actually photovoltaics. I should check with certification staff. And then last but not least, a little bit of an anecdote. Some of you might remember my house that kind of kicked things loose in 2002. The first passive house on this side of the ocean. I finally, I built it in 2002 with a plan by 2020, having had time to save up money for a PV system. And finally, last fall, I put it on. This is a 5 kW. The roof is not all taken up. I'm overproducing by 3,000 kilowatt hours, which I'm intending to charge my electric car with, which I don't have yet, looking for it. But just living in it and seeing it, how it works, it is absolutely phenomenal. It feels really good. To conclude, just want to invite you all to come and join us for the 14th annual North American Passive House Conference, the leading passive house conference in the nation. Lots of great lessons learned to be shared, fantastic details. We will have a bend on like hot and humid climates. Obviously, we're in Washington, D.C. We're also in Washington, D.C. because there's a lot cooking there. PHIUS+ has been written into the the green building program that they have there as an alternative compliance path. And it's also going to be written into the zero energy code that they are working on. I believe it's out for public comment right now. So it's very timely for us to be there, also talk about the new Green Deal. And we're very excited. Please come and join us. It'll be a lively debate, and Zero will be right smack at the center of the discussion for this conference. And with that, final self-reporting information here for you guys who want to report the CPHC learning credit. And with that, I'm going to conclude, and I hope we still have a little bit of time for questions. Anissa?
Thank you, Katrin. Thank you all for sticking around for our webinar today. It is 1 o'clock right now, but we will answer a few questions. A reminder that you will receive a follow-up email with the recording. So if you're not able to stick around for the Q&A, you can view it later on the recording. And Kat, if you don't mind backing up one slide so that folks can get that 5-digit code in case they didn't record it before.
Sounds good.
And then we have a few questions here on the docket. Let's start with this question. Does the space conditioning criteria estimator based on floor area and occupant density take into account the height of the building? So for instance, would a 3-floor, 12,000 square foot building and a 6-floor, 12,000 square foot building have the same space conditioning requirements?
That's an excellent question. I believe there is a surface to volume ratio input as well in the calculator, so that would take that into account.
All right, great, thank you. I know you brushed on this topic, but there's a fellow who's asking about the Canadian standards. The question is, what I have seen in Canada references the PHI European standard. Is PHIUS recognized and used in Canada?
Well, easy answer. PHI has a very strong foothold in Canada. We did have trainings actually before the PHI did in Canada. So we have a sizable community there that is working with WUFI Passive and is successfully employing the PHIUS+ standards. But unfortunately, the city has not been, city of Vancouver particularly, has not been very receptive to us arguing that we have created some significantly improved standards for passive building. And so far, they have not recognized us, and we could use some help from some of you who are on the line, because we very strongly feel that, as I mentioned earlier, more in this particular case is actually less, and the PHI standard is not very granular. I mean, like with what we've done now on the PHIUS+ in 2018, we've moved even further away from where we initially started. We started with the PHI standard, but we ran into quite a few issues. For one, cost overruns, and that the targets were not climate specific and therefore misled designers. And they banked, for example, on more insulation, but in turn created a building that had cooling load increases and that overheated. So they used more material, i.e. more embodied carbon, and then, but it didn't result in any greenhouse gas emission reductions, but in less comfort in addition to that in terms of warmer climates. So what we're seeing is, like, when you use our standards compared to the PHI standards in Canada, well, and here in the US as well, you get a building that is better optimized, uses less material, less embodied energy in materials, and at the same time, it is in almost all cases better in terms of source energy performance because of the optimization. The targets really, really matter. So we really hope that we can convince folks in Canada who are policymakers, and that we get a chance to present those benefits to them. So anybody who has any who would like to help with that effort, we would be very thankful for that.
All right, another question. Can you elaborate on the densely packed multifamily workaround, and also when will it be released?
Yep. They are in the final stages. The board has essentially already decided that they like the alternative that has been proposed, basically using the zero code calculator from Architecture 2030. As we are kind of like working our way, and this is a significant shift from initially how we looked at source energy. Folks have to understand that. So by putting ourselves, basically by aligning ourselves with 2030, we're moving away from this traditional kind of like passive building envelope and then total energy source limit based on carbon reductions, and then leave the PV up to those who want to put it on, right? It is a different way of thinking of designing towards zero. And the board and the tech committee, they feel very strongly that we need to lead, and that by setting source energy targets that lead folks towards zero and help them and help the market and the grid develop and respond to that. That is essentially the intention here. The workaround will help to keep the source energy targets more like in the range of what it was for 2015. And that should be voted on very, very shortly. And I'm actually excited about the two options, because I don't know if our per person source energy fairness principle philosophy is the right one. We are a collaborative organization. We like to look at how other people think about this. Same with the actual definition of zero. We all need to work together to come up with the most workable solutions, because we have a crisis on our hands, and we all need to work together to do the best we can to hit the targets.
All right, maybe we have time for one more question. Does that sound good, Kat?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is a question about BOPT. Are there other methodologies or tools like BOPT for commercial or multifamily?
I'm only aware of BOPT. I like to think that there are others. And I would also like to mention that in addition to that BOPT tool that we used for like the general targets, WUFI Passive is now testing a parametric tool that allows the designer, beyond applying these general targets that we have calculated in BOPT, to kind of project specifically further cost optimize. That's a really cool functionality that we hope we can make available very soon to every WUFI Passive user. I think this is coming very soon here. So probably not a very helpful answer. I'm not aware of any other tool other than BOPT for this particular purpose that we've used it for.
All right, thank you. So we're going to be wrapping up our webinar today. Thank you for all the questions. We will be compiling them and try to get back to some of you if your questions weren't answered. We do have a webinar coming up next month as well. And if you're interested in joining us, it's going to be on June 4th, 2019. The title is Solis Condominium Seattle. It's a case study for multifamily passive house construction. It's presented by our comrades over at Weber Thompson Architecture. These folks are also CPHCs, Emily Doe and Aaron Swain. And it's free for PHIUS members. So keep a lookout for that. It is on our website if you'd like to sign up. Thank you, Katrin, for the wonderful presentation today. I know there's been a lot of interest in hearing about this subject. We really appreciate you being on the line, and thank you all for sticking around even after the hour, and we hope to see you next week, or excuse me, next month. Too much coffee today. I also have added a few links in the chat box. One of the links is for our conference that Kat had mentioned earlier in DC in December. So please note those links if you're interested. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day and enjoy the weather. All right.
Thank you.